Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we bring you 8 chilling true stories from the heart of the wilderness tales that will make you think twice before stepping into the woods, staring into the dark, or lighting a campfire. From haunted trails to things that crawl out of fire pits, each account is drawn from real experiences shared by real people. So grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and get ready. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Man in Yellow at Copper Creek. I was 7 the summer my uncle got married, and our entire extended family gathered at a state park nestled deep in the Appalachian Hills of West Virginia. The place was called Copper Creek, named after the narrow stream that wound through the thick forest like a living thing. I remember the picnic tables were uneven, the charcoal grills were rusty, and the air smelled like hot dogs, bug spray, and damp moss. The adults were busy setting up decorations near a wooden shelter, while the kids were told to stay nearby and play in the clearing by the creek. I wandered off not to be disobedient, but because I was used to roaming outdoors on my own. My family lived on a small farm 2 hours away, and it wasn't uncommon for me to spend whole afternoons barefoot in the fields or poking around the tree line. That day, I followed the sound of running water beyond the marked path, past a thicket of wild blueberry bushes, and into a shaded patch where the sun barely reached the forest floor. That was when I saw something that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was just a fisherman standing in the middle of the creek, but the water was far too deep and fast where he stood. He didn't wobble or shift like someone fighting a current. He was completely still. The man wore a long yellow coat, almost glowing against the green gloom of the woods, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. Something about him didn't sit right, though I couldn't explain why. His clothes looked old, like something from a forgotten time, and his arms hung at his sides in an unnatural way, stiff and unmoving. I watched for a moment, half hidden behind a rock, waiting for him to step forward or say something. But he just stood there. Then slowly he tilted his head toward me. That simple motion made every hair on my neck rise. He hadn't moved his feet, but he was now facing directly where I crouched. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear splashing. But he was closer than before. I froze. I didn't even breathe. The man in yellow stood in the middle of Copper Creek, the water rushing around him, but not touching his boots. He wasn't standing in the water. He was above it, just barely, like something pressed between reality and a reflection. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of that wide yellow hat, but I could feel his eyes on me. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, he lifted his hand and pointed directly at me. He didn't speak, not at first. The creek roared around him, masking everything. But then I heard it, his voice somehow, underneath the water, almost as if it bubbled up from beneath the surface. He said my name, not shouted, spoke, clearly, calmly, my full name. I didn't remember telling anyone where I was going, and I sure as hell didn't remember ever seeing this man before. I took a step back, tripping over a root behind me, falling hard on my back. When I looked up again, the man was now standing on the opposite side of the creek, even though I hadn't seen him move. The air felt heavy, like something was pushing down on my chest. I scrambled up and turned to run, but the woods suddenly felt unfamiliar. The trail I had followed was gone. In its place were shadows and a silence that didn't belong. Then I heard splashing fast, aggressive, and I turned back. He was gone. No figure, no yellow coat, no hat. Just the water, and the place where he had stood was now a deep, swirling pool with no bottom I could see. That was when I heard a whisper inches from my ear, though no one was behind me. "Come closer," it said. Not a request, a command. My body jolted. I ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't stop running until I saw the edge of the clearing, where my cousins were still chasing each other with sticks, completely unaware that just 100 feet away, something impossible had happened. My chest burned, my lungs felt like they were on fire, but I couldn't stop shaking. I stumbled into the crowd of family and tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. My aunt noticed and crouched down beside me, asking if I was okay. I nodded, but I must have looked pale or strange because she kept staring at me with concern. I wanted to tell someone about the man in yellow, about how he spoke my name and never actually walked, how the creek had swallowed his image like it had never been there. But I couldn't get the story out. It sounded too ridiculous, even in my own head. So I sat down quietly on a bench, sipped from a juice box, and stared out into the woods, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then I saw something that made my heart lurch, a yellow scrap of cloth caught on a branch, fluttering in the breeze just where the trees began. I didn't say anything about the cloth. I just stared at it, pretending not to notice as I finished my juice and watched the shadows shift in the tree line. That night, back at the rental cabin, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's hand pointing at me, his hat, his stillness above the water. Around 2 in the morning, I finally got up and looked out the window. The trees were swaying gently under the moonlight, but something stood just beyond the fire pit, the faint outline of a figure in yellow. I blinked hard, wiped my eyes, but it didn't vanish. It didn't move either. I backed away from the window and crawled back into bed, pulling the covers over my head like I used to when I was little. The next morning, I checked. There were footprints in the dirt just a few heading toward the creek. Years later, during a visit to that same park, I walked the same trail with my older cousin. He didn't remember anything I told him about that day. But as we passed the riverbank, he stopped suddenly and said, "Huh, do you hear someone calling your name?" I didn't, but I didn't wait to find out. To this day, I don't know what I saw at Copper Creek. I've looked up legends, asked rangers, even searched through old forum posts for anything about a man in yellow who walks on the water or whispers names through the trees. Nothing. No stories, no warnings, not even a local ghost tale. But I remember every detail, the way he moved without moving the weight of his presence, and the way the woods seemed to shift around him. Maybe he was never meant to be seen. Maybe I wasn't meant to hear my name from his mouth. I haven't been back since. I don't plan to. But sometimes, even now, I dream of that yellow coat fluttering at the edge of the trees. Story 2. My father brought me. Camping to prove the thing was real. When I was 11, my father took me on a camping trip deep in the Shasta Trinity Wilderness in Northern California. It wasn't our first time, but something about this trip felt different. He was quieter than usual on the drive, more focused, checking his old maps and making cryptic notes in a little notebook he always kept tucked into his jacket. We drove past the popular campsites and turned down a barely visible dirt road that twisted through the forest for miles. Eventually, we stopped near a small meadow surrounded by thick pine trees. There were no other campers, no trail markers, no signs, just us in the woods. Dad said this was a place he used to visit with his brother back in the day, though I'd never heard him mention it before. I helped set up the tent while he lit a fire, and when the sun started to dip behind the ridge, he told me to stay close to camp, not to wander. His voice was firm, not scared, not just serious, like he was waiting for something or someone. That night, as the fire crackled and the sky turned black above the trees, I sat beside my father while he stared silently into the flames. He hadn't said much since dinner, and every time an owl hooted or a branch snapped in the distance, he would glance up sharply like he was listening for something specific. I remember asking him what we were doing out here, and he just said, "There's something I want you to understand." Then he handed me a flashlight and told me to go inside the tent and get some sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag for a while, staring at the canvas above me, listening to the wind move through the branches. At some point, I must have dozed off, but I woke again a short time later, not from a sound, but from a feeling. A strange pressure in the air. And then I heard it, a voice. A woman's voice. Soft, familiar. It was calling my name from somewhere deep in the trees. And the strangest part was it sounded exactly like my mother. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening, my heart already thudding in my chest. The voice came again, clearer this time. It was my mother's voice, without a doubt calling my name with the same gentle tone she used when waking me up for school. But she was supposed to be at home, hours away. I unzipped the tent slowly, and the cold air rushed in. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. My father was nowhere in sight. I stood barefoot on the packed dirt flashlight, trembling in my hand. The voice called again, but now it sounded farther away, deeper into the trees. Against every instinct I had, I stepped toward it. Just one step, then another. The moment I crossed the edge of the clearing, the forest swallowed me. The air changed. The silence grew thick and unnatural. I raised the flashlight, but it flickered and dimmed, casting strange, shifting shadows between the trunks. Then I saw movement. Not a person, not an animal. A shape tall and hunched, standing between two pines. It turned slowly, as if it had been waiting for me. Its body was covered in tangled hair, its limbs too long, its arms dragging near the ground. And in the center of its face was a mouth. Just a mouth. No eyes, no nose, just a gaping maw that stretched wide as it stepped forward. I couldn't scream, couldn't run. The flashlight died completely, and in the blackness, I felt something wrap around my wrist, dry and leathery like bark, and begin to pull. I stumbled, tripping over roots, my knees scraping the ground. The voice came again, but now it was all wrong. Still my mother's tone, but warped, like something mimicking her poorly. It said my name again, too slow, almost like it was chewing the syllables. That's when I realized it wasn't calling me. It was luring me. I twisted away as hard as I could and fell backward onto the forest floor, hitting my head on a rock with a dull crack that left me dizzy and gasping. Somehow, in the confusion, the grip on my wrist loosened. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly, crashing through low branches and brush thorns tearing at my arms. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. After what felt like forever, I burst into the clearing and collapsed near the remains of our fire. My father was standing there, staring at the tree line. He didn't look surprised to see me, just relieved. He rushed over and checked my arms, my head, and without saying a word, led me back into the tent. I didn't sleep. Neither did he. In the morning, he made breakfast like nothing had happened. But when I asked him where he'd gone last night, he just said I was close by. I wanted to tell him what I'd seen, but I didn't have the words. And part of me already knew. Somehow he'd been waiting for it. Not just the creature. Me. He'd known it would come. It wasn't until years later, during my first year of college, that the full weight of that night finally sank in. I had nearly forgotten the details until I stumbled across a forum about unexplained disappearances in U.S. national forests. One post mentioned sightings near Shasta Trinity that sounded eerily familiar, creatures with no eyes, voices mimicking loved ones, campers lured into the woods and never returning. I couldn't sleep that night. The memory hit me like it had just happened. I called my father the next day and asked him directly, why did we camp there? He went quiet for a long time, then finally said, your uncle and I saw something there once when we were your age. I had to know if it was real. I asked him what would have happened if I hadn't run, if I hadn't fought back. He didn't answer. I pressed further, and that's when he said something I'll never forget. It doesn't usually let them go. There was silence after that. We haven't spoken since. I don't think I was the first kid he brought there, but I might have been the first one to make it back. And now I live with the question he never asked why me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had taken one more step into those woods. If I had followed that voice without question, would I have vanished like the others, just another name whispered around a campfire? Would my father have packed up quietly and driven home alone? I still dream about that creature, about the way it stood there waiting, like it knew me, like it had always known me. I haven't been camping since. I can't. The sound of wind through trees makes my skin crawl. And when I hear someone call my name from far off, even in a crowd, I freeze. Because I'm never entirely sure it's someone I know or something else. Story 3. The Thing That Climbs Out of Frozen Lake Reyna. When I was 9, my family spent a winter break at a remote cabin near Lake Reyna in northern Ontario. The lake was frozen over that time of year, a wide sheet of glassy ice surrounded by snow-covered evergreens and long silences that seemed to swallow sound. My parents loved the quiet, the lack of cell service, and the smell of firewood. I hated it. I remember the cabin being old and drafty, with a loft bedroom where I slept alone while my parents stayed downstairs. At night, the wind would rattle the windows and the cold crept in through the floorboards. One night during a heavy snowstorm, the power went out. I stayed awake by the window, watching the wind push snow across the frozen lake. It was late, maybe past midnight, when I saw something move out on the ice. At first, I thought it was a moose, or maybe a fox. But then, it stood up, not on 4 legs, on 2, just far enough away to be blurred by the snowfall, but close enough for me to know it was watching. I leaned closer to the window, pressing my forehead to the cold glass, trying to make out more details. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there in the middle of the frozen lake arms, slightly outstretched like it was trying to keep balance. But something about the way it stood was wrong. Its limbs looked too long, its posture too still, like it wasn't adjusting to the wind at all. The snow kept falling thick and fast, but I could still see it clearly, its shape never blurred or shifted. That's when I noticed the footprints. A trail of deep impressions led from the far edge of the lake straight toward our cabin, not away from it, toward it. But the strange thing was, the prints didn't come from the woods. They came from the center of the lake itself, where the ice should have been too thin to hold anything. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. The figure was gone. I scanned the lake searching, but there was nothing there now. Just the wind, the snow, and a trail that ended at the shoreline. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed curled under the blankets, wide awake, ears tuned to every creak of the old cabin. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something that made my stomach turn. It was a tap, light, deliberate. At first, I thought it came from the roof, maybe ice shifting or snow falling. Then it happened again. A tap. Then another. This time it was definitely from the window. The same one I had been staring out of earlier. I slid out of bed slowly, heart pounding, and peeked between the curtains. At first, I didn't see anything, just a blur of frost and snow. But then I noticed it, a shape low hunched right outside the window. It was crouched so close I could see the outline of long fingers pressed against the glass. It had no clothes. Its skin was pale bluish gray like old ice. Its head was tilted upward, and though I couldn't see its face clearly, I could feel it staring right at me. Then it moved, not away. It rose slowly, impossibly tall, until its head reached the top of the window frame. It placed one long hand flat against the glass. A crack formed beneath its palm. I gasped and stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The sound must have startled it, because in the blink of an eye, the figure vanished from view. I didn't hear footsteps. No running. Just silence. I raced downstairs, calling for my parents. They were already awake, confused and half-dressed. I pointed at the window and begged them to look. But by the time they got there, the snow had covered everything. No footprints, no sign anyone had ever been there. My parents said it must have been a nightmare. But the next morning, when the sun came out and the storm had passed, I found something half buried in the snow just outside the cabin. A long, thin handprint with 6 fingers. I stared at that handprint for what felt like forever, the snow melting slightly around it under the morning sun. The shape was wrong. It was too long, too narrow, and the 6 fingers weren't spread naturally. They were splayed like something had braced itself against the ground while crawling. I called my dad over, hoping maybe this time he'd believe me. But by the time he came outside, the wind had already blown snow across the print, blurring its shape. He shrugged it off, said it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon sliding on the ice. I didn't argue. I just nodded and kept the rest to myself. But that entire day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had touched the cabin. Not just passed by it, touched it. That night, I insisted on sleeping downstairs. My parents let me curl up on the couch near the fireplace, and for a while, I felt safer. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a strange sound. Not tapping this time. Breathing. Slow, heavy, fogging up the glass behind the curtains. I didn't move. I didn't look. I just lay there, eyes closed, pretending I was still asleep. We left the cabin 2 days later, and I didn't tell my parents what I'd heard that night. I was too afraid they'd brush it off again, or worse, tell me I imagined it. But I knew what I'd felt. The next winter, when we stayed home instead of traveling, I begged my mom to let me move my bed away from the window. I started keeping the blinds closed at night, even if it made the room feel like a box. A few years later, while organizing old family photos, I came across a faded Polaroid from that trip. It showed the lake frozen and still with our cabin in the background. But in the far distance, near the tree line behind the lake, there was a figure. Tall, thin, barely visible in the blur of snow. I asked my dad about it, and he laughed it off, said it was probably a trick of the camera. But he didn't look me in the eye when he said it. And in the back of the photo, I saw something else, another set of tracks. Not from the cabin out toward the woods, from the woods toward us, again. I still have that photo tucked away in a box I rarely open. Every now and then, I pull it out and stare at that faint shape by the trees, trying to convince myself it's nothing. Just snow. Just shadows. But deep down, I know better. Something came out of that lake. Something that didn't belong to this world. And it saw me. I haven't been back to Lake Reyna since, and I don't plan to. But sometimes, on especially cold nights, when the wind howls through the trees outside my bedroom window, I swear I can hear it breathing again. Slow, heavy, like it's waiting for the lake to freeze once more. Story 4. The Shadow Man Who Watched Me Die and Laughed. I was 5 years old when I was diagnosed with leukemia. Most of that year is a blur of white hospital walls, the beeping of machines, and the scent of antiseptic. My parents took turns staying with me, and my room overlooked a patch of forest that bordered the children's wing of the hospital. The nurses always kept the curtains drawn at night, but I liked to peek through the gap. Something about the trees felt peaceful to me back then. During the day, I'd watch squirrels climb the branches or see birds flit between the pines. But at night, the forest changed. It became still. Too still. My night terrors started not long after my second round of chemo. I'd wake up screaming, soaked in sweat, but never able to remember what scared me. My mom said it was just my brain reacting to the medicine. But one night, as I sat awake staring at the window, I saw something move just beyond the trees. A tall shape darker than the shadows around it, standing still, watching. I blinked and it was gone. But after that, the dreams got worse. Much worse. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of soft humming. At first, I thought it was the radio my dad sometimes left on low to help me sleep. But when I looked over, the radio was off. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the hallway light seeping in through the bottom of the door. The humming didn't sound mechanical. There was a voice low and slow, drifting through the room like it didn't belong to anyone. I sat up and turned toward the window. The curtains had been drawn shut, but there was a sliver of space between them. I crawled to the edge of the bed and peered through. That same figure was there again just beyond the edge of the tree line. Not moving, not even swaying, just standing in that impossible stillness like it had all the time in the world. I pulled back from the window quickly, heart pounding, but the humming continued. Louder now. Closer. It wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from inside the room. From the dark space between my bed and the wall. I froze, too scared to move or call out. The humming had changed. It wasn't tuneful anymore. It was slow, broken, like someone trying to remember a lullaby they hadn't sung in years. I turned my head ever so slightly toward the space beside my bed, the narrow gap where the shadows pooled deepest. At first, I saw nothing, just darkness. But then something shifted. A shape rose slowly from the floor, tall and thin, as if unfolding from the shadows themselves. It didn't crawl or walk. It simply stood its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it smiling at me. A wide, horrible grin made of nothing but presence and intent. It stepped closer, and the room seemed to get colder with each movement. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The thing leaned down its shadow, engulfing the foot of my bed. Then I heard it speak, not with a voice, but like words pressed directly into my thoughts. "You're not going to make it?" My heart raced so fast, I thought it would stop. Suddenly, monitors began to beep wildly. Lights flashed. Nurses burst into the room seconds later, shouting orders, moving fast. But none of them looked at the shadow. They didn't seem to notice it at all. As they surrounded me, the figure stepped back, melting into the corner. But just before it disappeared, it turned its head one last time. And it laughed. No sound, no expression. Just the unmistakable sensation of being laughed at by something ancient, cruel, and patient. Then it was gone. The nurses told my parents I had flatlined for a few seconds. I was lucky, they said. Lucky to be alive. But deep down, I knew the truth. That thing had been waiting, and it almost won. After that night, the nurses never left me alone again. One of them stayed in the room at all times, even while I slept. My parents acted like it was just precaution after the scare, but I knew it was more than that. I didn't tell them what I saw. I couldn't. Every time I tried, the words caught in my throat, like I was still frozen in that moment. But the dreams continued. Each night, I'd wake up gasping for breath, sometimes crying, without knowing why. And always I felt it, the shadow man lurking just outside the edge of vision. I began to dread the darkness, begging to keep the lights on, even during naps. One night, my mom found me curled up on the bathroom floor with the door locked and the lights blazing. I told her I felt safer there where there were no windows, no shadows. She hugged me and said nothing. A few days later, I overheard her whispering to my dad about finding a child psychologist. But the truth was, I wasn't imagining anything. I knew what I had seen. And worse, I knew it wasn't done with me yet. Not even close. Years passed. I survived the treatments. I went into remission. Life moved forward. But the shadow man never truly left me. Even as a teenager, I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with the distinct feeling that someone was standing at the foot of my bed watching. I never saw him outright again, not like I had in that hospital room. But I'd catch glimpses in mirrors in the corner of my vision or in the space between street lights when I walked home alone. For a long time, I convinced myself it was trauma, nothing more. Until last year when I started seeing a new therapist who specialized in childhood medical trauma. During one session, we tried guided memory work. She asked me to recall that night in the hospital. As I closed my eyes and described the room, the voice, the laughter, she went pale. After a long pause, she told me her son had died of leukemia in the same hospital. And just weeks before he passed, he began describing a tall shadow in the room. No face, just a voice, just laughter. We ended the session early. She never returned to the practice, neither did I. I've stopped trying to explain it. Some nights I still dream of that hospital room, of the monitors screaming, and that shadow leaning in, whispering things I was never meant to hear. I don't know what it is, or why it comes for children on the edge of life and death. But I know it waits, and it remembers. I've seen it in the eyes of other survivors, the ones who don't talk much about their near-death moments. Sometimes when I pass by a dark window or catch my reflection in the glass, I half expect to see it standing behind me, smiling, not gone, just patient, watching again, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. Story 5. Room 213 wasn't empty. When I was 16, my high school debate team traveled to a regional tournament in Montana. We stayed in an old roadside inn just off the highway, the kind of place with dim yellow lights, a creaky lobby, and rooms that hadn't been updated since the 80s. I was assigned to room 213, a corner unit at the far end of the second floor. The hallway leading there was strangely quiet, even though the inn was supposedly full. My roommate Jake went out with some of the others that night to get snacks, but I was exhausted and decided to crash early. I unpacked, turned on the small TV, and lay back on the bed closest to the window. Everything felt normal enough until I noticed the air in the room was colder than the hallway. I checked the thermostat, but it was off. Figuring it was just the drafty building, I ignored it. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and tried to sleep. That was when I heard it. A soft rustling, like someone moving inside the closet. At first, I thought it was just the heater kicking on, or maybe pipes in the wall shifting from the cold. But the sound didn't stop. It grew more rhythmic. A slow scrape, followed by a soft thump, as if something or someone was shifting their weight inside the closet. I sat up, heart beginning to race. The closet door was shut, but I couldn't remember if I had closed it. I stared at the handle, expecting it to turn at any moment. After a minute of silence, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe Jake had come back and was messing with me. I got up and opened the closet. Empty. No bags, no jackets, no sign anyone had been inside. Just the musty smell of old carpet and dust. I shut the door and climbed back into bed. But the moment I turned off the lamp, I heard it again, this time from the opposite corner of the room. Like bare feet dragging softly across the carpet. Moving closer, I didn't get up again. I just lay there, eyes wide open, and waited for morning. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to the sound of the door to our room clicking shut. I bolted upright, assuming Jake had finally come back. But when I called out to him, there was no answer. I glanced over and saw that the other bed was still untouched, covers neatly folded just as I'd left them. That was when I noticed something else. The air in the room wasn't just cold anymore, it was freezing. My breath hung in front of me like smoke. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. Then came the sound again. That same dragging shuffle, but now right beside my bed. I turned my head slowly and saw a shape crouched at the edge of the mattress. Not standing, not walking. Crouched. It looked like a person, but its limbs were too long, its back arched in a way that made my stomach turn. Its head was tilted sharply to the side, and though the face was obscured by stringy dark hair, I could feel it watching me. It didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed long and slow like it was savoring something. My body locked up. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I lay frozen as the thing slowly reached one hand toward the side of my face. Its fingers were unnaturally thin, more like sticks than flesh. Just as they brushed my cheek, the room lights snapped on. Jake stood in the doorway holding a drink and a bag of chips, looking confused. "Dude, are you okay?" he asked. I sat up, gasping, sweat pouring down my neck. I looked around. Nothing was there. Just the cold and the silence. But the closet door was open now, and I was sure, absolutely sure, I had closed it. I didn't tell Jake what I saw. Not then. I just said I had a nightmare and probably left the closet open by mistake. He shrugged, tossed me a bottle of water, and went about his night like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't relax. Not with that feeling still crawling under my skin, like something had followed me out of sleep and was still watching. I kept the lights on while Jake dozed off. Every sound from the hallway made me flinch. Around 3 in the morning, I finally worked up the courage to close the closet door again. As I reached for the handle, I noticed something on the inside scratches. Long vertical gouges, like someone had dragged their fingernails across the wood over and over. Some were deep enough to splinter. I stepped back and sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at that door, half expecting it to swing open again. It didn't. But that didn't make me feel better. When the sun finally came up, I packed my things without waking Jake and waited in the lobby for the others. I never spent another night in room 213, and I never asked who stayed there before me. A few months after the trip, I was helping my debate coach organize paperwork in the classroom when I came across the hotel's group reservation sheet. Out of curiosity, I glanced at it and saw something that made my stomach drop. Room 213 hadn't been on the original list. It was handwritten in the margin, added last minute in a different ink, almost like an afterthought. I asked my coach about it, and he said the hotel had been overbooked and gave us a spare room they usually kept empty. When I pressed further, he said it used to be a staff room, but after an incident years ago, they stopped assigning it to guests. Something about a maid quitting suddenly. He didn't know the details. That night I searched online and found a forum post from someone who claimed they stayed in room 213 back in the early 2000s. They described waking up to a woman crouched beside their bed, her face obscured by hair reaching toward them with long fingers. They said she vanished the moment the lights came on. I never responded to the post. I just bookmarked it. But sometimes late at night, I open it again, just to remind myself I wasn't alone. I don't stay in roadside motels anymore. I don't sleep in corner rooms, and I never ever leave the closet open at night. Some part of me still believes that if I see her again, if I catch even a glimpse of that hunched figure in the dark, something in me will snap. I still wonder why it chose me, why that room that night. Maybe it wasn't random. Maybe room 213 isn't just haunted. Maybe it's hungry. And maybe like that closet door, it only needs to be opened once. The rest of the time, it just waits. Quiet, patient, and closer than you think. Story 6. They whisper through the attic vents. The summer I turned 12, my family rented a rustic wooden cabin in the Oregon mountains for 2 weeks of peace and fresh air. The place was old, built in the early 1900s, once used as a rural schoolhouse before it was converted into a vacation property. It creaked with every step, and the walls were thin enough to hear someone whispering in the next room. My little brother and I shared a room in the back of the cabin, right beneath a square attic vent that looked like it had not been cleaned in decades. The first few days were uneventful. We hiked roasted marshmallows and played cards by the fireplace. But I noticed something strange at night. When the house got quiet, I could hear sounds coming from the attic vent. At first, it was just creaking like old beams shifting. But then it changed. It became whispering. Soft, rhythmic, like someone repeating the same words over and over. I asked my parents if there were animals up there. They said the attic had been sealed shut for years. The whispers grew clearer each night. At first, I thought it was just the wind catching the old wooden slats, but by the fourth night, I could make out distinct syllables. Not full words, just fragmented sounds that seemed to repeat in a low, breathy tone. My brother slept through it all, snoring softly in the bed across the room. I tried waking him once, whispering his name, but he just rolled over. That night, I pressed my ear to the wall beneath the vent. The sound stopped instantly, like whoever or whatever was speaking knew I was listening. Then something tapped. Once. Sharp. Deliberate. I pulled back quickly and stared at the vent. I wanted to call for my parents, but I couldn't explain it without sounding ridiculous. Instead, I climbed into bed and pulled the covers over my head. Just before I fell asleep, I heard it again, only this time it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from the vent in the hallway just outside our room. The whispers were moving. Closer. The next night, I refused to sleep. I waited until everyone else in the cabin had gone to bed, then grabbed my flashlight and a notebook. I needed proof. Something to convince myself I wasn't losing it. I positioned my chair beneath the attic vent and sat with my light off, straining to hear. Hours passed. Around 2 in the morning, the whispering returned, louder than before, and clearer. The words still didn't make sense, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. Then something shifted. A faint rustling sound. The slats on the vent trembled slightly, as if something was just behind them brushing softly against the wood. I stood up slowly, heart pounding, and raised the flashlight. I expected to see dust, maybe a few old cobwebs. But instead I saw an eye. Not a normal eye. Pale gray, almost milky, staring directly down at me through the vent. I dropped the flashlight, and it clattered across the floor. In the dark, I heard more tapping this time from the hallway vent, then another from the living room. They were everywhere, whispering in unison now. I ran to wake my parents, stammering out what I had seen, but by the time they got to our room, the whispering had stopped. The attic vent was still, empty. They said I'd had a nightmare, stress, imagination. But the next morning, when my dad went to check the attic entrance in the hallway ceiling, he found it open. Not fully just enough for someone or something to crawl through. A dusty line of fingerprints trailed down the attic ladder and across the ceiling vent leading to our room. Small prints, too small to be an adult's. That day I noticed my brother acting strange, quiet, distant. That night while he slept, he whispered in a voice that was not his own. The same words I had heard through the vents, repeating, word for word. I didn't sleep at all after that. I lay in bed, watching my brother, listening to him murmur in that strange cadence, the same broken phrases I had heard through the vents. His lips barely moved, but the sound came clearly. Too clearly, like it wasn't coming from him at all. The next morning, I told my parents everything. I begged them to take us home early. My dad looked annoyed, my mom worried, but they agreed we'd leave the next day. I thought it was over. That night, I stayed on the couch in the living room with all the lights on. I tried to drown out the whispers with the TV, but sometime around 3 a.m., the static started, not from the screen, but from the hallway vent. Then came the sound of something crawling, slow, scraping, as if nails were dragging across the inside of the ductwork. I held my breath, too terrified to move. Just before dawn, the noises stopped. When my parents woke, I didn't say a word. I just pointed at the floor vent near the front door. There in the dust was a single child-sized footprint, bare, facing inward toward the room. We left the cabin that morning without eating breakfast. My dad said nothing as he drove, gripping the wheel tighter than usual. My mom sat beside him, glancing back at us every few minutes like she expected something to go wrong. My brother was silent the entire ride home, staring out the window, eyes vacant. That silence stretched for days. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't eat much. One night I woke up to find him standing at the air vent in our bedroom, whispering into it with his hands pressed flat against the grate. I asked what he was doing, but he didn't respond. Just stared at me with that same blank expression and then climbed back into bed. A few days later, I found something stuffed behind our vent. A small cloth doll, old, and worn, its mouth sewn shut with black thread. I asked my parents if they recognized it. They didn't. We never saw it before the trip. I threw it away, but that night the whispering returned. Not from the attic, from every vent in the house. And my brother, he smiled in his sleep. The first time he had smiled in weeks. But it didn't look like a smile. Not at all. We moved the following year, but the vents in the new house still made noise at night. My brother eventually went back to being himself, or at least something close to it. But I never forgot that summer, or the way the whispers seemed to follow us home. I don't trust quiet houses anymore. I sleep with a fan on music, playing anything to drown out the sound of voices that aren't supposed to be there. Sometimes I think about going back to that cabin just to see if it was real. But deep down, I already know the truth. The whispers weren't tied to the house. They were tied to us. And they still are. Story 7. The Wolf Twins of Black Hollow. My uncle owns a small cabin near a place called Black Hollow, a steep ravine buried deep in the Utah wilderness. The locals don't talk about it much, except to warn hikers not to stray too far after dark. When I was 13, my cousin and I spent a week there during summer break. The days were quiet, filled with fishing and long walks through pine-covered trails. But the nights felt different. The trees seemed too still, the air too heavy. On our third evening, just before sunset, we wandered farther than usual and found a strange clearing near the edge of the hollow. The grass was flattened in circular patches, and the silence there felt unnatural, as if the birds refused to sing. My cousin said it was probably just deer bedding down, but I wasn't so sure. We left quickly and didn't talk about it. That night, I woke up to the sound of scratching against the wooden porch. It was slow, deliberate. I crept to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. That was the first time I saw them. The twins. And they were not human. They were crouched just beyond the edge of the porch light, half in shadow, half in moonlight. At first glance, they looked like wolves, but something was off. Their bodies were long and thin, with limbs that bent in strange angles, too human to be animal, and too wrong to be either. They moved in perfect unison, their heads tilted the same way, watching the cabin with glowing eyes that shimmered gold in the dark. I ducked down, heart pounding, afraid they had seen me. When I peeked again, they were gone. No sound, no footprints. Just empty porch steps and the wind whispering through the pines. I tried to wake my cousin, but he grumbled and rolled over. I lay there for hours, eyes fixed on the window, afraid to blink. Just before dawn, I heard it again, scratching this time at the back wall of the cabin, closer to where we slept. But mixed into the noise was something else. A sound that chilled me more than the claws. It was laughter, soft, high-pitched, like a child trying to imitate joy. The laughter faded into silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there just beyond the wall. I lay frozen, eyes wide, until the sky outside turned gray with morning. The next day, I tried to convince my cousin to help me search the area behind the cabin. But he brushed me off, said I was dreaming. Still, I went alone. Behind the back wall, I found deep scratch marks in the wood, 4 parallel grooves like claws, nearly a foot long. The strange part was, they were high up, far too high for any animal to reach without standing. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited again by the window, and sure enough, just past midnight, they returned. The twins emerged from the tree line, slowly, almost cautiously. But this time, something was different. They weren't alone. A third figure followed behind them, larger, slower, almost regal in the way it moved. Its shape was similar to lupine, but its fur was streaked with gray and silver, and its eyes burned a deeper gold. It stepped between the twins, placing a hand, yes, a hand, on each of their shoulders. Then all 3 of them looked directly at me. I stepped back, heart slamming in my chest. Suddenly, one of the twins raised its head and made a sound that didn't belong in this world. It was a howl at first, but then it shifted, morphed into something else. A voice, and it said my name, not whispered, spoken, clearly. My cousin jolted awake beside me, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't answer. I pointed toward the window. When he looked, they were gone. He said I was dreaming, sleep-talking, imagining things. But I know what I heard. And worse, I recognized that voice. It didn't just say my name. It sounded like my sister. My sister who had disappeared near Black Hollow 3 years before, without a trace. I didn't say anything to my cousin about the voice. I wanted to believe, I imagined it, that maybe the stress of being back near Black Hollow had twisted my mind. But deep down I knew. I remembered that tone, the slight rasp, in the way my name was spoken. It was her, or at least something that had her voice. The rest of the trip passed in a blur. I avoided the windows at night, slept with a flashlight in my hand, and never went near the tree line again. On our last morning, as we packed up to leave, I found something resting on the porch. A small bracelet. Pink plastic beads with faded letters. It was the one my sister used to wear. The one she had on the day she vanished. I picked it up slowly, my hand shaking. I never told my uncle. Never told my cousin. When we got home, I put the bracelet in a drawer and didn't touch it again. But I started having dreams. Always the same, standing at the edge of the woods, watching the twins as they smile with human teeth and call out my name. And behind them, my sister smiling too. The dreams didn't stop. Weeks passed, then months, and still they came, always set in that same clearing near Black Hollow. The twins would appear first emerging from the trees, like shadows with eyes. Then the taller one would step forward, and finally my sister. But each time she looked less like herself. Her eyes glowed faintly, her skin too pale, her smile too wide. I started researching disappearances in the area and found more than I expected. Hikers, campers, even children, all missing near the ravine. Some locals whispered about skinwalkers, others about ancient forest spirits that mimicked the dead. But one detail came up again and again, people hearing voices of loved ones before they vanished. I went back to the cabin alone last fall. I don't know why. Maybe part of me hoped to see her again. I hiked to the clearing near the edge of Black Hollow. It was just as I remembered. Still, cold. And in the dirt at the center I found fresh footprints. Bare, human-looking, but wrong. 2 sets, side by side, and one smaller circling them, like a child, or something pretending to be one, waiting for someone to recognize the voice. I never went back after that. I told myself it was closure, but the truth is, it left more questions than answers. I still hear her voice sometimes, usually in the early hours before dawn, soft and distant, calling my name from the edge of sleep. I don't respond. I've learned not to. Because whatever I saw in Black Hollow, it wasn't just about my sister. It wanted me too. And I think it still does. I've moved far from those woods, but some nights when the wind howls just right, I feel them nearby. The twins, the thing behind them, and the smile that no longer belongs to her. Story 8. What crawled out from the fire pit that night. 2 summers ago, I joined a group of friends for a weekend camping trip in the highlands of northern Argentina. The spot we picked was remote hours from the nearest town, nestled beside a dried-up riverbed and surrounded by thick brush and jagged cliffs. It was the kind of place that felt untouched, like time had forgotten it. We set up camp around a large stone fire pit that looked much older than the park itself. One of the guys joked that it had probably been used for rituals or sacrifices, but we all laughed it off. That first night, we stayed up late drinking, telling ghost stories, and watching the flames dance under the stars. Around 2 in the morning, the fire started to burn lower, and the conversation died down. Just as I was drifting into that haze between awake and asleep, I heard something pop beneath the embers. A soft cracking like something shifting under the stones. I sat up and stared at the fire pit. The coals pulsed red, and then something moved underneath them. Something alive. At first, I thought it was just a chunk of wood collapsing in the heat. But then I saw it again, something small pushing upward from beneath the ashes, like a hand testing the surface. I blinked, leaned forward, trying not to wake the others. The fire had burned low enough that only a faint orange glow lit the pit, but I could clearly see movement. A ripple beneath the stones like something breathing. Then slowly, a thin shape began to emerge. It was long-jointed strangely and ended in fingers. Human fingers, charred and clawed. I stumbled back, heart hammering as a wave of heat pulsed outward from the fire, far too intense for what remained. I glanced around expecting someone else to stir, but my friends were asleep, sprawled in their tents and hammocks, oblivious. The coals shifted again. A second hand appeared. Then came the whispering, soft, distant, but rising from the pit itself. It wasn't in Spanish. It wasn't any language I knew. But somehow I understood the intent behind it. Something was waking up, and it was hungry. I couldn't move. I crouched near the edge of the firelight, barely breathing, watching in frozen silence as something began to rise from the pit. First, a head bald and blackened like old driftwood, crusted in flakes of ash. Then shoulders long and narrow, hunched unnaturally like a broken puppet. Its arms were too long, dragging behind it as it crawled over the stones. The thing made no sound except for the faint crackling of embers clinging to its skin. It didn't seem to notice me, or maybe it didn't care. Its movements were slow, deliberate, like it had just woken up after years underground. When it turned its head, I saw no eyes, only two dark hollows that seemed to drink in the light around them. Then it stood. Taller than any man, I'd seen, thin as bone, with skin that glowed faintly from beneath, like hot coal beneath cracked stone. It stepped out of the fire pit and turned toward the nearest tent. My friend Nico was inside. I opened my mouth to yell, but no sound came. I was paralyzed with fear. The creature bent low inches from the fabric of the tent and tilted its head. That's when I heard the voice again, but this time it came from everywhere, the trees, the ground, the air. It said his name, slowly, twice. Nico stirred inside. I saw his silhouette shift. The creature raised one hand, the fingers curling inward like hooks. I snapped out of it. I grabbed a burning log from the edge of the fire pit and hurled it at the thing, screaming as loud as I could. The log struck its back, shattering in a burst of sparks. The creature turned toward me for the first time. It didn't move closer. It just stared. For a long time. Then it stepped backward, folding into itself, shrinking until it vanished back into the pit. The coals flickered once, then went black. The silence after it disappeared was almost worse than its presence. I stood there trembling, gripping the half-burned stick like it could still protect me. Nico stumbled out of his tent, rubbing his eyes, asking what the hell was going on. I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the pit. A few others woke up too, blinking in confusion at the cold ashes and my terrified expression. No one believed me? Not really. They said I must have dozed off and dreamed it all, maybe hallucinated from the smoke. But I know what I saw. And the proof was there in the fire pit. The stones had shifted. Some were cracked down the center, still warm to the touch, long after the flames died out. And in the dirt beside the pit, there were prints, barefoot but long, with toes that curved unnaturally inward. We left later that morning, packed up fast, no more laughter or joking. The ride back was quiet. I never mentioned the voice. I never said what it whispered. Because somehow, it knew my name too, and I could still hear it faint and low humming beneath my thoughts, like an ember refusing to go out. Back home, I tried to forget. For weeks, I avoided campfires, even backyard grills. The scent of smoke made my stomach twist. But the real trouble started when I began to dream again. It always started the same way, standing alone in a clearing, the fire pit from that night glowing red in the dark. Then the voice would return, louder, clearer, calling not just my name but others too. Names I didn't recognize at first. But then I saw the news. 2 of the friends from that trip died in the same week. Nico was found at home burned badly, even though there had been no fire. The other, Sophia, disappeared entirely. Her apartment door was locked from the inside, no signs of a break-in. Just a smell of ash and something rotten. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Who would believe me? Last night I found something on my porch. A small piece of stone cracked down the middle, still warm to the touch. I didn't bring it inside. I didn't sleep. I sat up watching the shadows shift across my walls, listening to the low hiss in the vents. And beneath it, faint but growing clearer, I heard the voice again. This time it was laughing. I don't go camping anymore. I don't light candles. I unplug the stove when I'm not using it. I've become obsessed with avoiding open flames, like some part of me believes that fire itself is a doorway, and that thing is still watching from the other side. I've tried moving, tried forgetting, but it's no use. The heat finds me. The voice finds me. Sometimes, late at night, I see a faint orange glow under the cracks in my bedroom door. And when I get close enough to listen, I hear my name slow and burning. Whatever crawled out of that fire pit didn't just wake up. It followed me home, and it's still waiting. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.